Hello everyone. In this video, we are going to learn about demand for a resource from the firm's point of view. Resource demand. Basically, for any resource, the demand comes from the product that it is being produced. If a product has the demand, that means resource itself will generate the demand. Um, Easy example is, let's say if automobile industry, if there is lot of demand for the automobiles, that means the labor working in the automobile industry, their demand is also going to increase. That's what we call it as derived demand, because resource demand completely derived from the demand for the product the resource is used to produce it. Individuals firms demand for a resource is actually equal to marginal revenue product of that particular resource. If it is a labor demand for a particular firm, we have to take marginal revenue product of labor for that particular firm. So what is marginal revenue product? Marginal means extra. That means if you are using an additional unit of a resource, how much is the extra revenue received? That's what we measure it as marginal revenue product. So the way we measure it is change in total revenue when the resource is changing. So divided by change in the amount of resource. Another way of calculating is simply take the marginal product of the resource times price of the product. So what is marginal product then? Marginal means again extra. So we are talking about the product. That means using an additional unit of a resource, how much is the extra output being produced? That's what we measure it as marginal product. Again, the way we calculate is change in total product over change in the resource. Since marginal product actually measures marginal revenue product measures firm's demand for the resource, so it has to be downward sloping. Now looking at why MRP is downward sloping. Easy way to explain is marginal product is actually downward sloping because of law of diminishing marginal returns. Since marginal revenue product is marginal product times price of the product, and price of the product is constant, so MRP is also downward sloping. Now let's see a simple example. If two workers can harvest $46 worth of apples and three workers can harvest $60 worth of apples, what is the marginal revenue product of third worker in this particular case? To calculate this, we simply take MRP, which is change in total revenue over change in the resource. So total revenue is changing from $46 to $60. So we're going to write it as 60 minus 46. Number of workers is changing from 2 to 3. So 3 minus 2. What we look at is from the third worker, the additional revenue here is $4. Now let's look at another example. Suppose 4 workers can harvest 10 baskets of strawberries. 5 workers can harvest 12 baskets of strawberries. If each basket of strawberries sold at $10 in the market, I'm asking different questions. First one is marginal product of fifth worker. When it is marginal product, we have to simply take change in total product over change in resource. How much is the product changing? It's going from 10 to 12. So I can write 12 minus 10. Of course, in the denominator, it's always going to be 1, at least for this class. So that means marginal product here is an additional 2 baskets of strawberries. Marginal revenue product of fifth worker, I have to take marginal product times price of the product. So price of the product is $10. So it's going to be 2 times 10 gives us $20. So for hiring fifth worker, the firm or the employer can actually realize 20 extra dollars of revenue. Now, what is employer's maximum willingness to pay for the fifth worker? That can be up to this particular $20. So if he's paying anything up to $20 or below $20, he doesn't make any loss. If he has to cross $20, that's when he starts to make the loss. So to apply marginal analysis, he can pay up to $20, nothing more than that. Now let's look at the determinants of resource demand. So that means if you consider resource demand, it is downward sloping. We want to figure it out what can actually change this particular resource demand. Easy way to look at is think of something like this. This is the resource, and on the vertical axis we actually have price of the resource. Okay, so if you take price of the resource, what's happening is you will see MRP or marginal revenue product downward sloping, which is actually representing demand for the resource. Now, sometimes this resource demand can actually increase, that means going to the right, or it can actually decrease, which is going to the left. We want to figure it out. That's what is the determinants means. What can actually change the resource demand to increase going to the right, and what can actually cause resource demand to decrease. Now, first reason for change in the resource demand is change in the demand for the product that resource is used to produce. If product demand increases, the demand for the resource automatically increases, such as if strawberries are in more demand, there is more demand for the labor to harvest strawberries. Second one, change in the productivity of the resource. So that means if resource becomes more productive, that means marginal product actually increases. When marginal productivity increases, you can see MRP is equal to marginal product times price of the product. So MRP is also going to increase, which represents demand for resource. What change in productivity of the resource depends on? One could be technological advances or quantity and quality of other resources such as capital resources, or it could be change in prices of other resources. All these things can change productivity of the resources. The third factor that we want to look at is determinants of resource demand is substitute resources. If two resources are actually substitutes, such as labor can replace capital, capital can replace labor. In that case, if price of one resource increases, that means you want to shift to the other resource to reduce cost of production. That means the demand for other resource actually increases as well, and vice versa. That means if price of one resource decreases, demand for other resource also decreases. Those what we call it as substitute resources. Example for substitute is, let's say a bank employee versus ATM. ATM is a machine, bank employee is a human labor. So when price of ATM starts to decrease, demand for labor actually started to decrease in banking industry. There is a second type of resources, what we call complementary resources. That means these two resources are used together, such as truck and truck driver, or a computer and computer technician. So if price of one resource increases, automatically it causes demand for other resource actually to decrease. So once you have these determinants, based on that, if a condition is given, you should be able to recognize how is this affecting that particular condition. Now, let's look at a couple of examples to explain this one. First example, in the United States, professional football players earn much higher income than professional soccer players. What is this? Uh, what is this causing this difference in incomes? Simple way to explain is going back to the determinants of resource. The demand for football game is much higher. Consumers' demand for football game is much higher compared to consumers' demand for the soccer game. That is causing, when the demand increases, automatically wage rates is going to increase. So the simple answer to this is higher demand. Okay, so higher demand for the game or football game, demand for football in the US. Okay, so actually causing the resource, which is the players in this particular case, their demand is higher. That's causing their incomes to be higher as well. Now let's look at the second example. If labor and capital are substitute resources in production, if price of capital decreases, what happens to the demand for labor? If price of capital decreases, firms tend to move towards the capital. They can replace labor with the capital. If that happens, demand for the labor actually starts to decrease. This is exactly what we give as an example for mechanization. Okay, so more and more mechanization, more and more capital becoming cheaper and cheaper, causing the demand for labor actually to decrease. This concept can be applied in the labor market more clearly to understand how the labor demand in different professions is actually changing.